Hello everyone and welcome to Football Manager 2016. Phil here, and I wanted to do a video on my tips for Football Manager. I've been playing Football Manager since I was very young, back when it was Championship Manager, back when it was very different to how you see today. Maybe some of you are too young to remember, but there never used to be things like 3D match reports, stuff like that. But I just had a look on my Steam account today, and since 2011 I've clocked up 3,836 hours in Football Manager games, from Football Manager 2011 up until Football Manager 26. That's 156 days worth of playing. So I'd like to think I know a bit about the game. I'm certainly not an expert. There are people out there who have played way more than me. But I wanted to give some advice to people who are perhaps struggling or a bit new to Football Manager and maybe a little bit overwhelmed with what exactly is going on. So I'm going to go through my kind of top 10 tips in Football Manager, starting with number 1. When you start a new game, whichever team you pick, doesn't matter whether it's lower league or Real Madrid, anyone you pick, don't try and change things too quickly. So by that I mean, don't try and buy too many players straight away. Don't completely get rid of your whole backroom staff. Don't completely change everything about the club, because you will struggle. Do things in small amounts, along the way. I usually wait a whole season before I do anything. I might buy one player to begin with. I know it's very tempting. You jump in a game, maybe you have a large transfer budget, if you're one of the big teams, or maybe you feel like your team needs, these players and you can get them there and then. But just hold on, because your team will be unsettled. Basically, you'll bring new players in, they won't be used to the club. It always takes players a long time to kind of fit in. Adaptability is a real kind of big point with players. You only really understand sort of adaptability when you scout players kind of comprehensively, and that takes a bit of time to do. It doesn't just come with just a quick scout report. So you may know a player who's very highly adaptable. You can get in straight away, he's going to do well, but the majority of players will take time to bed in, and you don't want to unsettle your team straight away by buying loads of players, even if you have got loads of money. One or two players here or there is not a problem at all. Definitely, you may need to do that. And same with the backroom staff. I generally do not touch my backroom staff until probably the second season, I'd say. That's when I really kind of have a look at things, and that's when I sort of add in players, add in coaches, add in scouts, things like that. If I feel like I need a couple of coaches just to build up the numbers, just to get things rolling, then I'll do that. But I certainly won't, wholesale get rid of the whole coaching team, bring in all new guys in the first season, because your first season is really your most important. You can get sacked at the end of that season, and then you're going to go nowhere. So it's very important that you don't try and change too much too quickly. You can certainly play around with tactics and things like that. That's not a problem, because players will pick up on tactics fairly quickly. But don't try and change things too much in terms of your personnel. That's definitely my recommendation, number 1. Number 2, pay attention to your players. Don't play players out of position. That may seem pretty straightforward. You're not going to play Mustafi here as a striker, but what I mean by that is pay attention to where their best positions are. You'll see this in their kind of role and duty. You can see here Mustafi, he plays best as either a ball playing central defender or just as normal central defender. I could play him at right back, but he's not going to have, he's not going to be as good there. Pay attention to that. You may have a whole tactic, and you may want to you may have a great player who you want to fit into that team, but if at the end of the day, if he just doesn't fit into that tactic and you want to keep that tactic, then the player is just not going to be for you. So always bear that in mind. You can train people into different positions, and it will pick up. It's a fairly slow process, especially if they're not that adaptable as well. And especially if they're quite old, the younger it's easier to do. But do bear that in mind. You can, of course, if necessary, play a player out of position. it's also good to have kind of quite versatile players as well, like someone like Tim Sparv here, who can play around the pitch. Sure, he's not going to be very good as an attacking left midfielder, but in a pinch, if I needed that, he's there. I can do that. So bear that in mind with players. Even small things like, you may have somebody who you think is going to be a great kind of like Danny Parejo here. You might think he's going to be a great kind of regista here, but he's going to suffer a loss just by playing that position, even though it's going to come up as accomplished. His natural position is going to be an advanced playmaker, or possibly even a deep line playmaker in the centre of the pitch. Pay attention to that. If I play him as a box to box, I'm going to take a performance hit on him. That's the way it's going to go, basically. And especially kind of with strikers as well. You'll find with strikers, some guys, you just can't play them as a target man. It's not going to happen. You might turn around and think, this player is a great player, I want him in my team, I'm going to put him as a target man. But if he's not in there, probably someone like Paco here, I wouldn't play him as a target man. I don't think he hasn't got the right build for it. He's only 5'9". His heading's good, but his jumping reach is 10. I'm not going to play him as a target man. So pay attention to where your players are best at playing and play them in that position. Else you're going to suffer a performance hit big time, basically. The next up is fitness levels. This is something I'm really keen on, and I don't think it's something which people actually go over too much. I'll generally never play a player if he's less than 90% fit, unless he is a star player and it might be a massive match like a cup final or something like that, or I'm desperate. But when a player gets down to the 80s, I'll just not play them, and definitely anything lower than that, I won't play them. The reason being, number one, they're more susceptible to injuries. So players with lower fitness levels are going to, be in danger. So if I was playing, say, Paco in my next game and he was an 82, there's a more likelihood he's going to be injured more. Plus, he's not going to last the whole match. Players, even sometimes 91s, I won't play. 92s, I'll put in 100% or a 99% player, because it's so important to get that kind of physical presence. You can let in late goals or you can score late goals. That's the way I look at it, and I'd much rather be scoring late goals. I usually have my training set up as a team to fitness, because I just think it's really important to have that kind of level. Especially, I think, also if you're in the lower leagues where perhaps technical levels are not as high. If you can outrun your opponent, you can be scoring in the 80th, 90th minute. That can change your season, basically, from there. Also, it's important is match conditions. So on the left hand here, you have their overall fitness level, and then you have their kind of sharpness here, their match fitness. You always hear in football, in real life, people talking about match fitness. That player's not match fit, he needs a few games under his belt. You can achieve this by giving them games for your under 21s or your under 19s. You can even arrange friendlies to get a player playing again, or bring him on. But say someone like Hintersir here, I think he's just come back from being injured. If I wanted to play him, even though he's kind of 92 and I think, it could be quite good, I probably wouldn't, because he's only 61% sharp, so he's going to suffer a penalty if I play him. I might bring him on for the last 15 minutes of a game to try and build that up. That will go up as he gets more minutes under his belt. If he was a star player, I might take that risk, but it's a very big might, and again, it would have to be a big game. It's very important, I think, the fitness level, as well as form. Form is, you hear people tell me to say, form is temporary, class is permanent. A good player will be a good player, and if you're not getting a very good performance out of him, you have to look at where you're playing him. But also, if you've got a guy who's playing out of his skin, leave him in there. He's playing out of his skin. I might have, say, my left wing back. This isn't a great example because he's not playing brilliantly, but if this guy was playing brilliantly and my other left wing back came back, even though he's better, I may well keep in that left wing back, because he's got that kind of run of form. It's going to dip eventually, and I'll maybe swap him out. But don't be afraid to play a player who is in a good run of form over a player who is perhaps better, because that form will keep him going, especially for strikers as well. If they're in a kind of goal scoring run, leave him in there, give him some games to get going. and that's especially important with new strikers if you bring them in. Sometimes I've found a striker can take half a season before he gets going. A real quality player, you can spend a lot of money on him. It'll take him a good half season sometimes to get in. So don't abandon on them. They need game time. They need to get used to your tactics. They need to get used to the team. Maybe they've come from another country, so they need to adapt to a new country and new surroundings. Do your homework on them. Make sure they are adaptable to kind of come to another country if that's what you're doing, and give them time to bed in and get going, because you will see the reward at the end of the day. And especially if you're making a large investment in somebody, you may not be able to afford to just pick up somebody else and bring them in. So that's fitness levels at number 3. Number 4 is especially important, I think, if you're starting off. You're always going to have a transfer budget. Sometimes you may not have a transfer budget at all. Sometimes you can adjust your wage bill and increase your transfer budget, or increase your transfer budget and decrease your wage bill. Generally, you're going to be able to do one of the two, unless you're joining a club who is absolutely broke. My advice is, alongside what I'm saying, if you don't go spending all your money to begin with, hang around for a little bit and try and find the bargains. They're going to pick up. You're going to have players come on who are unhappy. Maybe they're not getting first team football. And I always hold on to a bit of cash until the first January transfer window. It's not ideal to bring someone in midway through the season, but you can pick up a bargain, and then they're almost there for you for the next season. I'll be looking for players who are unhappy they're not getting games, or players who are coming to the end of their contract. And if you've spent all your money in the first transfer window, you're going to lose out on those players who are potential real bargains. Especially players who are coming up to their contract. Have a look, see which players are going to be running out of contract at the end of the year, see which ones appeal to you. Remember, they might just sign another contract, in which case, fair enough, they might stay with the current club they're in. They might not be interested in joining you, but there's always going to be players who will be looking out. And just have a look. Halfway through the season, you'll know which players are playing in a team. You'll be able to go through different squads in your league or other leagues, and you'll be able to see players who are perhaps unhappy, players who are wanted by other clubs, who you can get in there and kind of maybe pick up on a real bargain, because players are difficult to sign, especially top players, and sometimes, especially if you're not one of the real big top clubs, you can pick up players from teams like Real Madrid, Barcelona, teams like that for absolute steals, just because they haven't played, maybe for a season for that club, but they've got acres of potential. They might be young, coming through. So there's a real kind of bargains there. I don't like to look at lists of kind of, these are the wonder kids who are coming through, or, sign these are the best left backs, because I've picked up some players over the years who have just been absolutely fantastic for me, who I've basically never even heard of in my life. And I may pick them up in another game, and because I'm playing a different system, because I'm playing a different team in a different league in a different country, they just don't work out, basically. So always bear that in mind. I think those lists can be good, but sometimes it can be a bit misleading, because players are going to play better in different leagues in the world. People say, Messi couldn't do it in the Premier League. He probably could. I've no doubt about that, but undoubtedly I think he might find it a little bit tougher than he would in Barcelona, or in the Spanish league, I should say, rather. And the same for kind of Italian players, German players. They might find it a little bit easier in other countries perhaps than in England, where it's a bit more physical and slightly less technical. So always bear that in mind. What you maybe think in real life quite often will transfer into this game because of how detailed and in depth it is. So always bear that in mind. So always leave some cash for that transfer window, January or the end of the season, because I think it's better in the later games, but certainly in the earlier games, you never used to get your next season budget until kind of, all the other teams have snapped up players you might be after. So always leave a bit, and you can be that guy who's snapping up players, at the end of the season. It might seem a long way away, but that's, you've got to kind of look to the future sometimes. What you're going to build next season, it's not that often I'll have a team which I will achieve everything I want to achieve in one season. It's going to go on, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons before I, get something I'm happy with it or going with. I think for this Valencia squad, we're in kind of November 2016. I won the league last season, but Valencia are a very good team, despite what Gary Neville may be doing currently. But certainly, if I wanted to go on and win the Champions League, I think I'd need to kind of build for another couple of seasons or so, and then kind of really kind of dominate from there, where some players are getting older and more experienced, and I'll be able to bring in, without changing too much, some fresher players. So always bear that in mind. Number 5, always have a backup tactic. I've got some tactics on this YouTube channel which work out very, very well for me. But I'll always find halfway through the season, generally, maybe a little bit later, maybe sometimes even a bit sooner, that tactic won't work as well. You can get off to a flying start with these tactics. You can do very, very well. But sooner or later, the computer is going to work you out. That's what it's there to do. There is no one tactic which will work forever, and you need to do no work on it whatsoever. There is always something that needs to be done. The computer will always work it out for you. So sometimes I'll have different variations of the tactic. Sometimes I'll make simple changes to tactics. So for example, I might decide to, for a few games play with an attacking midfielder instead of a 3 central midfielders. I might decide to play with a defensive midfielder. Little changes like that, little tweaks can unsettle your opponent. They will be used to you playing one way. You can switch it up a little bit, and that can get you back on track. Also, just doing things like maybe instead of going really short on the passing, mix it up a little bit in the next game. You'll see that your team, you'll start getting back to kind of winning ways, just from doing those little things. Or you may even want to have a completely different tactic, one you can just switch to. Maybe you can switch it up every couple of games, keep people guessing, things like that. It's good to have familiarity. You can see in the top right here with tactics. As players get better with tactics, you will see you'll see them get better and better with it. But little kind of variations I find on it. I wouldn't recommend completely changing your tactic midway through a season, especially if you have no familiarity with it. You can have up to 3 tactics on the go at once. I would recommend having them, even if you never use the third one. Even if it's just there, they're always going to learn it and get used to it. And it may be that at the end of the season, you decide you're going to try it out, in some friendlies and see how it goes. And it's best to try out tactics you're familiar with. You're going to get better results from it. So always have that backup tactic. Sorry, keep it fresh, basically. Keep your opponent guessing on what you're going to do. Because otherwise you will find you have a great start to season, and then you will peter out to the end of the season, and it will get very frustrating if you just play the same tactic over the whole season. There's enough tactics out there for you to, go crazy, basically, and always create your own as well. There are a few basic principles I find to creating a tactic. If you're going to go shorter passing, you'll probably want to go for a lower tempo, unless you have highly technical, skilled players. If you're going to go for a direct, more direct tactic, you may want to go for a higher tempo. Counter-attack, you may want to have a deeper defensive line if you have slower players. You may not want to play out defence if your players are not that good on the ball. Just things like that. You may want to close down. If you've got good fitness levels, you may not want to close down if you're a team who wants to play on the counter a little bit more, and maybe you only want to close down in your half. Things like that. You want to let the team come onto you a little bit more. Think about how real football teams play, and it's often how you can kind of fit into that. So always have a backup tactic. That's number 5. Number 6 is squad rotation. You may well have a team which is very, very fit, is able to play a lot of games, and is in a great, is doing very well for you. But squad rotation is important. Basically, you're going to need over the course of a season 22 players. Unless you're very lucky with injuries, you may only need 15, 16. You're going to need 22 players, and you've got to keep the 11 who aren't playing happy. Generally, with reserve goalkeepers, you don't need to rotate too much, unless your reserve goalkeeper is very, very good, in which case you may run into trouble. But otherwise, you may just need to. And if players aren't playing, you're going to find after a few months they're going to be knocking on your door, they're going to be complaining, they're going to want to leave, and that will upset your squad harmony, because nobody wants to have unhappy players. in the club. So you're going to have to do rotation. Sometimes it's going to be forced on you with injuries, or just flat out you've got so many games you need to rotate it up, and sometimes you're going to have to just take that hit, and maybe your star midfielder is going to have to sit out this game because your other midfielder's getting a bit itchy, and it's maybe an easier game and you think you can win it anyway. So while unless you have a very, very small squad, you might get lucky in that sense, and the other players may be okay. We may not have to do much of a rotation, but generally if you have a team which you want to be able to compete in cups as well as the league, you're going to need a larger squad, and you're going to need to rotate. Sometimes I'm known to, especially in the early stages of kind of cup competitions, just play a completely different team. I'll have a cup team. You'll see that in real life as well, especially in the Premier League. You'll see teams. Arsenal were famous for it a few years ago, playing their entire kind of youth team in the League Cup and things like that. And actually those competitions can be quite good for you. If you've got players who are kind of maybe fringe players, you want to see what they can do, plus you want to keep them happy with games, put them in those cup games, but also they're going to want to play some league games as well. Not too many, but you have to kind of bear that in mind. Sometimes players, they're not going to be happy unless they're playing every single game, and maybe if they're not your number one choice, you're going to have to let them go, no matter if you think they're a really good backup, because otherwise it's going to disrupt the whole team. Something else which you have to think about as well is your captain. Sometimes you'll walk into a team and the captain will not be suitable for the team. They may be very low on the kind of leadership level. So one of the things you want to look at for captain is kind of things like leadership. So old Paolo here would make a very poor captain, just 3 on the leadership scale. Now if he was captain of this team and I walked into it, it would give me an option to have a chat with him. He'd probably be fine with me saying, I don't think you're right for the role. But sometimes you're going to have an issue where you might turn around and think like, I definitely want Valero here to be captain. 100%. He's my favourite player. I want him in as captain. But you might have somebody who's much better suited, say, to becoming a captain. But you're like, I'm not too keen on him. I don't want him as my captain. Maybe he's not my first choice player. A captain I always find is very, very important in the team. They're the ones who are the kind of the leader on the pitch and will make a difference for you. So sometimes you have to just kind of make that player who is better at being a captain, even if you kind of want your star player to be the captain of the side, in that kind of way. And also sometimes you have to bite the bullet if they're already the captain. You may want to change it up, but it may upset the whole team if you do so. So you have to bear these things in mind, definitely. Sometimes they're going to be okay with you switching about, and sometimes not. So squad harmony is very important in your team, 100%. It's a very difficult thing to kind of recognise as well, because you can see here everybody in this team seems to be pretty happy. There's a couple out on loan who are a little bit down, but squad harmony is also, or morale is also affected by whether you're winning games or not. And my team's winning games, we're first in the league, so ultimately they're going to be happy. Many times you find that players ask for a transfer, and then come the end of the season you've won a cup or something like that, and suddenly they're like, oh no, I want to stay with the team, and they come back again. So always bear these things in mind, basically. Also, good way to look, you can see the happiness here. It's got 2 positives, no negatives. I think his happiness is okay from here. I think it's probably because he's been injured a little bit, so he's been out. Might be why it's a little bit low. I'm trying to find someone who's got some negatives. Don't know if I have anybody in this particular squad who has some negatives. Which is good, I guess. Haven't seen anybody. Let's have a look in towards the bottom of the league. There's bound to be some players who are not happy. Whether or not it'll show me. Oh yeah, it won't show me without scouting them, which is fair enough. Let's see if I've got anybody in my under 19s who are unhappy. Don't think I have. Fitness. So yeah, everyone looks okay, to be fair. Doesn't seem to have any negatives in here. I've just got a happy squad, that's good. Where are we? Reports? No, not reports. We want to go to selection info, that's the one. So yeah, it looks like everybody's okay, basically. Apart from this guy, he's fairly poor, but no negatives. Okay, so he's just unhappy because he's injured, basically. So different things will affect them. A lot of the time it's because they're not playing. They want to be playing games. They're unhappy with that. Or they might be unhappy with something you've said about them. So be careful in interviews. They may not. They may have had a terrible game. But you have to be careful with what you say about them, as in real life. You have to be careful. Sometimes players react well if you give them a bit of a kicking. Sometimes they don't react well at all. So it's important to know the players. You'll get used to them as you kind of play along with them as well, as to what they and how they react to different things as well. Just like in real life, these players, they always have their kind of little personality quirks. You just have to kind of play along to that. That's part of the kind of man management side of the game. Number 7 is something which will probably be a bit controversial for some people, but it's something I kind of generally tend to find when I start a game. So number 7 is don't concentrate on youth. That might sound very strange, but to begin with, when you start in a new game, it's no good trying to find players or spending your time on players who or maybe you're finding players who are 18, 19, and you're thinking, they're going to be great in a few seasons' time, because the chances are either in a few seasons' time you may not be at that club, or in a few seasons' time your club has moved on to a level that player will never reach. So this particularly kind of stems to, say for example, you were playing in the English leagues for a championship side. Your ultimate goal is that championship side. Well, not ultimate, but your main goal is going to be to get into the Premier League. Now, you may have 5 or 6 youth team players in there who are looking really good, but by the time you get into the Premier League, they may be championship level players. So if you're spending your time on them, trying to give them games, trying to build them up, and they're never going to reach that level in the Premier League where you want them to take them on, they're just not worth it, basically. So to begin with, if you're a club looking to build up, I wouldn't concentrate too much on youth. If you're already a big club, then yes, it's important to concentrate on youth, because number 1, it will save you a lot of money. Number 2, you can mould a player to the way you want them. And number 3, it helps you in your team, because there's nothing that fans love more than a homegrown player. And it also helps you in European competitions with quotas and things like that. So that's important. But to begin with, I never focus on youth. I'll obviously always loan young players out to give them games where possible. I'll try and tutor players as well. That's very important. If you're kind of unsure on the way the tutoring works, your players will have a level. So you see here, we have a highly professional group of players, and Mustafi is in a similar mould. So he's a professional player, basically. They have different levels. I think there's a report, if I find it somewhere, which will tell me this. That's your best duties. Full player status, no. General info, no. I thought there was. Homegrown, nope. This. Section info. Okay, so maybe there isn't. I think that maybe there is somewhere. But anyway, you'll get to know your players, their personality here. So you can see this guy resolute. That's good. You may have some players who don't have. You see professional here. Good. You want to have those kind of words surrounding it. Fairly professional. Okay, that's okay. Fairly ambitious. Again, okay. If you have players who say for example with Mustafi here, resolute, commanding centre back, this guy's going to be a great teacher for somebody. He's a bit young at the minute, but in a few years he's going to be able to tutor someone. What you want to do is to tutor younger players with players who have a better kind of personality than them. So if they're kind of a highly professional player, a leader, and you have somebody who is young, if I go to my under-19s, we'll see here probably. So you see temperamental. It can build up their personality, basically. Low determination. So quite often you'll find youth team players with kind of poor, and this one's okay, fairly determined. But for example, I wouldn't get somebody who's fairly professional to tutor a fairly professional player. You want to get somebody who's at a higher level to tutor them and try and bring them up to their level. That's how they're going to actually kind of work out their I would always tutor players, to begin with. I would always, try and work with my youth team players, but I'm not going to be scouting, around for young players to build for the future if I'm in the Championship, because the level of players I'm going to get, unless I find someone who looks really, really good, but the level of players I'm going to get is probably not going to be good enough for where I want to get to. Certainly in the kind of Valencia team, there's only a couple of players who are ever perhaps going to get near my first team squad who were in the under-19s, when I started. And it's great to have an under-19, but certainly for a good couple of seasons, I'm not going to be looking to expand it, because I'm going to concentrate on my first team. And that's just the way it goes. And it's not a case of my personal time, kind of real life time, kind of to do that. I just kind of feel like it doesn't benefit my team currently to have that, because I don't know what level I want to get to yet. If I start picking up a few kind of wonder kids or things like that, I'll start scouting and finding those players, great. You can build a good team and bring some players through. But it's not something I concentrate on to begin with on there. I know some people may always say kind of, youth, it's great, you should have players kind of to bring through, but I kind of feel like you need to concentrate on keeping your job to begin with, to achieving those goals. Then once you have the kind of respect of your team and also of your chairman and things like that, then you can look to kind of bring in those players, because you're never going to bring in a player from the youth team who's going to come in and be 100% in the first team straight away. He's going to take a few games to get used to things. You may have to farm him out on loan for a couple of seasons as well. So bear that in mind. Next up, number 8, play to your team's strengths. It may seem fairly obvious, but sometimes we can kind of get carried away with what we want to do. So if you're a team, maybe you're in kind of League One in England, or you're a second division team in Italy, Serie B, something like that, you're not going to be able to play like Barcelona. Sorry to break it to you, not going to happen. You're not going to be able to play that quick passing tempo. You're not going to be able to play, players kind of, dribbling around people, scoring wonder goals all the time, because your players just won't be good enough to do that. You have to play to your strengths. If you've got a big man up top, play to your strength, get the balls into him. That's really, really important, because too many times you might have a kind of preconceived tactic in your head. I want to play with this team. Choose, if you're going to do that, that's fine, but choose a team who will already fit to that tactic. Don't go in, say, with a tactic like I have, with wing backs, and turn around and go, join a team which has got brilliant wingers, because you're not playing to your strengths. If you walk into a team that's got kind of 3 or 4 brilliant wingers, play with wingers. It might seem really obvious, but to begin with, that's what you want to do. You can then bring in those tactics over the course of the next season or two. As you bring in some more players, as you change things within your club, as players leave, you can change things up, but always play to your team's strength to begin with. That includes what we were saying earlier about player positions as well. I'm not going to play Valero as a ball-winning midfielder, even if I was like, I want to play somebody else as a playmaker. It's not going to happen. I've got to take him out and put in a ball-winning midfielder in there. I'm not going to play Negredo, as a defensive forward. He's not going to play that. I'm not going to play Embolo. Well, I'll probably play him as a complete forward. But play to your strength. If he's a good attacking midfielder, play him as an attacking midfielder. Don't be afraid to compromise the tactic you might be thinking of in your head to play a player in there. I get asked a lot of questions on my tactic about, can I play, this player in this position on here? Yeah, there's no real set stone on any tactic that you have, I don't think. If you have a player who, you're going to bring in and he's going to play brilliantly as an attacking midfielder, but you've got 3 across the middle like this, play him as an attacking midfielder, because that's where he's going to do the damage. If that player there is, playing at a 7.5, 8 every match there, and he's playing at 7 here, play him there, because you will see you will see the difference there. Always play to your strengths. Don't try and reinvent the wheel with them. If your keeper doesn't want to play as a sweeper keeper, don't play him as a sweeper keeper. Just don't do it. If you don't have any fast defenders, don't play with a high defensive line. If you do have fast defenders, don't play with a deep defensive line. Play to your strengths, basically. And then you can, if you have a kind of idea or a concept you want to kind of bring in, then you can bring it in over time, unless you want to do it from the beginning, in which case choose a team to fit that kind of tactic. Don't choose a team, don't choose your favourite team. I couldn't choose my team I support, Crystal Palace, and turn around and be like, we want to play a short passing game, because we're going to get blown out of the water basically. They've got fast wingers, they play direct counter-attack football. That's what I'm going to do. Play to your team strengths. Number 9. This is always something I remind myself of every single time I start a new save. So every single time you start a new game, as much as you might want to get going on it, never ever press that continue button until you have done everything you're happy with. Because when you start a new game, time is very precious. You have not got a long time until you start, from when you join to the friendlies you have to when you play that important first game. Friendlies are not important. It's nice to get a few wins, but they're more for trying things out, building up players' fitness and testing out tactics. But never ever ever press continue that first time until you have done everything. So that means setting up your training, setting up your team general training, your individual training on players, which, by the way, if you don't want to do straight out, if you've got good coaches, you can set them on it. I do recommend you think about where you're going with them, and do different things like that. But you can get your assistants to do things like that. Set that up. Set up a tactic in there, so each day they get more familiar with it. Get some scouting going with players as well. Have a look at your squad, see if there's a player you really think you're going to move on. See if there's any players in the youth team you want to promote who might be good backup. Have a look at your schedule. Get scouting these teams. Get your scouts out there. Do all of these things before you press continue that first time, because otherwise, you're probably going to forget it, and you can jump in the game and you really want to get going. You really want to get playing games, but that groundwork, those foundations you lay from the very first time you start off in the game, that will resonate across your entire season. Like ripples in a pond, basically. It might start off small, but it will grow and grow and grow. And the training, those extra few days training, will really help out your team, basically. So always do that. Number 10, also something very important to remember when you're playing. You're not going to win every game. It's not going to happen. If you win every game, you're the greatest manager on earth. Well done. You're going to lose games. I haven't lost too many games here, but there are some I've lost, and I will lose more over the course of the season. Don't be afraid to lose games. You learn more from a loss than you will from a win. You'll see more how your team, didn't work, or how it did work. You just maybe were a bit unlucky, with how it goes. At the end of the day, you're going to have slumps as well. That's going to happen, as it does in real life. Your team are going to go through a few games where they're not playing. Don't try and rush it. Don't rush into the next game thinking, we'll do better this time. Think about what you're doing. Maybe you need to tweak something in the tactics. Maybe you need to have a word with some of your players who aren't performing. Maybe you need to drop a couple of players and bring in some others. Have a think about it before you go into the next game. Otherwise it can get very, very frustrating. I've just had 2 draws in a row, 1-1. The team's not playing brilliantly. Before that game, you can see 5 games in a row, didn't concede 1 goal, winning 3-3, 2-4-3, and then all of a sudden a couple of draws. So I've got to think about where I'm going from there. Think about how the team's playing. Maybe I need to switch some things up, where their weaknesses are, before going into the next game. Sometimes you need to go right back to basics with a team. Sometimes your team gets found out. As I say, I'm approaching the halfway stage of the season. Maybe it's time to refresh the tactics a little bit. Keep things fresh. But it's okay. I generally prefer playing with teams from a low league because there's a lot less pressure on you. It's very, very rare for me to start off a game as a Man United or a Real Madrid or a Barcelona, because I like to build teams and clubs, but B, the pressure on you to win games straight away, and if you don't win the league or you don't win cups and things like that, you're probably going to get fired, and you might thrive under that kind of pressure. But ultimately we all play these games to have fun, and sometimes you can lose a few games in there and it stops being so much fun. So bear that in mind. It is okay to lose games. And ultimately, I think I was playing in my Cardiff save. I got to a cup final. I lost that cup final. The team I was playing, I had beaten them twice that season already. We got to the cup final. We got beaten. I was gutted, but it happens. And as in real life, you don't appreciate the wins unless you lose a bit. You could theoretically, if you wanted to, you could win every game in a season by playing the game. Lose or draw, restart, play again, tweak something, find out how it works. Play again. There's no real fun in that. It's like playing on invincible mode on something or other. You're not here for the story mode, basically. There isn't much of a story mode apart from the one you make up. So just remember that it's okay to lose, and sometimes you might even get fired. I've been fired before. I remember I played a game as Wrexham in the English Conference League, and at the start of the season their goal was to get promoted, and they were by far the best team in the league. It's tough though in the conference. If you play that league, it's a very tough league to win, and I think we ended up finishing third. I got to the playoffs. I got to the playoff final, and I lost the playoff final, and I got fired. And you might think, well, that's a bit harsh because I was the third best team in that league. No, actually, I think I was second even. I think I was second, and it was only the top one who gets promoted automatically and one from the playoffs. And I lost the playoff final, and I got fired, and I was gutted. But I carried on playing that save because I had some kind of good history behind me. Took another team on, got them promoted, and it felt even sweeter probably than if I'd got promoted with that team because Wrexham I was battling against them the next season. It felt like I had something to prove. So bear that in mind. It's okay. Sometimes you're going to get fired. You're never going to have the perfect game. Sometimes you may feel it's time to move on from the club. At some point, maybe with Valencia, if I can't continue on with this save, I'll get to a point where I go, right, I've taken this club as far as I'm going to go. Maybe I want to drop down a little bit or change league, go somewhere else. And do something a bit different. It's all fine. It's no problem. Sometimes you can have. I've certainly gone for a good 2, 3, 4 seasons before I've even won anything. But the accomplishment that you get from perhaps just staying in your league, or having a good cup run, things like that, or perhaps getting into Europe. It's a big one, especially in the Premier League. Getting into getting fourth place, it can be a fantastic achievement if you're not one of the big clubs. So just enjoy it, basically. That's my kind of top 10. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit with where you're going and what you're doing. But yeah, let me know. So please leave a comment if you have anything you want to add. I'm always interested to know more. As I say, I've played a lot of Football Manager, but I still learn things every single time I play. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.